Well, hello and good afternoon and good morning to everyone. I'm Frank Days, VP of Marketing here at Correlsense. On behalf of the Correlsense team, we welcome you to our webinar this afternoon, Best Practices for Managing and Monitoring WebSphere Message Broker. Before we get started today, I wanted to take a minute and go through a couple of items on our agenda. We're going to start the presentation today talking about how WebSphere Message Broker fits into enterprises today. Then, how is it different? What makes it a challenge for people in terms of managing it on a daily basis? Then we'll get to the meat of the presentation, which are some best practices so you can get the most out of monitoring and managing this platform. And then we'll share Correlsense's unique approach to managing this network component. And finally, we'll end it with a summary and questions and answers. We expect the presentation to last about 45 minutes. If you do have questions along the way, feel free to enter them into the chat window on the GoToWebinar, and we'll try to stop along the way and answer them as they come in. And finally, we'll be making the slides available on Correlsense.com tomorrow. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Amir Gabrielli, who's our VP of Solution Engineering here at Correlsense.
Thank you very much, Frank. So thank you all for joining this webinar. And basically the content for this webinar is taking from a research that our company did around the role of enterprise service buses in today's complex integration projects. We interviewed and had discussions with experienced WMB owners, including WMB admins, WMB developers, and executives. All are responsible for building and maintaining large-scale WMB solutions. So the content we bring you today is coming directly from the market and people that did it before and decided to share their experience with us. I hope you'll find this webinar useful and enjoyable. And let's jump into the webinar. So to put us in context, I would like to start by quickly reviewing a case study. Okay, so this case study is for WMB, a large-scale W implementation for a hospital network in Brazil. This market case is available on IBM site. You have the link here. You can go to IBM and explore more about this very interesting case study. And I was fortunate to meet the CIO of this hospital network and talk to him about the challenges of building such a complicated solution and the challenges he has with managing it in production. The story here is pretty short. This large hospital network was growing by acquisition. They constantly purchased more and more hospitals to grow. And the management gave this CIO a challenge to quickly provide unified services to the customer base and partners across the entire hospital. So if you want to set an appointment, if you want to get your medical record, that should be available for you through a single interface, but search information and activate services across the entire hospital chain. And think about the complexity of such a large-scale integration solution. There are more than 27 hospitals involved. Each hospital has its own IP, its own IT, its own services, its own data, and its own database repositories, and it's pretty complicated to take everything together and unify it under a single API and interface. So it's more than just developing this solution. Developing this solution is one challenge, but think about once it's already up and running, how difficult it is to maintain it running in production and with a zero tolerance for problems, because that could cause loss of customers and complications with partners. But still, it's pretty amazing this WMB was able to manage multiple databases, multiple servers, multiple services, multiple data centers to provide this unified set of services to partners and customers. And this is pretty impressive. WMB is #1 service bus in the market based on Gartner. But being able to do such an impressive solution comes with a price. So let's talk about the challenges. Again, being a hub for all the business critical transactions, or mediating between so many services, protocols, and APIs, makes you vulnerable to mistakes. It has this role within the data center and within the enterprise solution comes with inherent challenges. You know, there's a saying in IT that most of the system problems happen at system boundaries. And WMB always works on the system boundary, and the system boundaries. In a way, it's a bit error-prone. So the risks that you have, that people try to avoid when they have WMB are pretty obvious. You don't want to lose critical transactions. You don't want transactions failing. Because of the over-complexity of the environment and so many parts, you don't want to have general outages, and you don't want to have poor performances. By the way, just a general note, for outages and performance, even if they happen outside of the WMB, even if you have a slowdown or a problem with the web service or with the database, typically the WMB will be blamed for the problem. So as we try to figure out what the challenges are in terms of the organization, there are four categories of challenges. There are challenges related to the organization, organizational challenges. Challenges around change management. Challenges around accountability and transaction accountability. And finally, challenges around monitoring. So let's explore that a bit before we jump in. Organizational challenges. The reality is when you build a WMB-based solution, you have many owners. Many owners are involved in the making of a set of flows, which raises questions about responsibilities. Who is responsible on designing the solution? Who's responsible on implementing the flows? Who's making changes in the flows or to adjustments to the application? And who's testing all of this creature? A very quick example that I can give you, let's assume a simple WMB-based solution that kind of bridges between two applications. Even in this simple use case, we already have three owners. We have the owner of the first application, the owner of the second application, and the owner of the flow, of the WMB. And all of those together need to make this solution work. And I already talked about the challenges. And it goes even more granular than that. Take, for example, a developer of the flow is not reporting directly to any of the application owners, and probably doesn't really know well the application, and that makes the flows that are developed kind of more or relatively prone to logical errors because, for example, maybe the developer is not aware of all the statuses available in a specific message. So the idea is that this responsibility issue may cause developers to write flows that are a bit more error-prone for logical problems. And on top of that, you have another issue. When you start working and developing flows, you notice that developing flows is a bit more complicated than you thought so to begin with, or assumed there will be. And in many cases, not enough QA and testing is invested in testing the flows that are developed. So after the organization figure out how to manage responsibility, we come to the change management challenge. The platform, the WMB platform, is very flexible, and making changes and deploying changes is easy. Some would say maybe too easy. However, from the other side, the platform will not be kind enough to you, and it will not tell you which components in the environment will be affected by changes and what are the interdependencies. So when you make a change, you don't really have a clue who's going to be impacted by the change, and you need to be ready for that. Because if you do last-minute changes or small changes, it might work for your specific transaction, but other message flows may be broken because of incompatibilities that could occur from the changes you did. And again, we come back to the issue that the sense that we get is that in many cases, the test cycle, the QA cycles around introducing message flows and changing message flows are not well defined within the organization. The next challenge is actually a very interesting one. It is transaction accountability. WMB is typically used to drive the business most critical transactions. Okay, it's really a tool to facilitate integration between partners, customers, and almost all the transactions have a business meaning. So you can't allow yourself to lose transaction or to have problem with transactions. Now, the problem is that those transactions go through multiple applications, multiple services, and maybe multiple companies. Someone needs to take accountability for the execution of those business transactions that span across multiple applications. Someone needs to make sure that those transactions end successfully, and if they fail, someone needs to take the responsibility to tell why they failed. Nobody will do that for you. And also the WMB platform, again, will not be kind enough to tell you when transactions fail, getting stalled, or terminated in an unexpected manner. Of course, losing critical transactions will impact revenues and can drastically harm your credibility with your customer partners and even with your own business that will question your ability to deliver large-scale, critical WMB-based solutions. So transaction accountability. The last challenge I want to cover here relatively quickly is a monitoring challenge. When talking to a lot of WMB admins and WMB owners in the market, we got the sense that they're not too happy with the existing set of monitoring system around the WMB and their ability to monitor WMB-based solutions. There's good coverage for the WMB as a platform, for the MQ as a platform, but covering runtime flows and inter-dependency is not well addressed by the market. So that was quickly kind of the interesting challenges that we encountered. Of course, a lot of us know the challenges of not having a good monitoring solution in place. You won't be alerted on problems. Troubleshooting session will take too long, and just lose of control. So that was kind of a short review of some interesting challenges that you have with large-scale WMB-based projects. But now, after reviewing the challenges, I would like to share with you some best practices that were suggested and adopted by experienced WMB owners in the market and even some integrators. So best practices. I'm going to give you 7 best practices. The first best practice is write logs and for easy backtracking. Okay, you cannot avoid production issues. It's almost inevitable. Everybody is going to have production problems with WMB-based solutions. And if you don't have a good practice around logging, the troubleshooting session around WMB will be very complicated and be involved reading a lot of logs from different applications, DBAs looking into the database, and MQ admins looking into the queues. It turns out, from speaking to people, that the logging that inherit, or if you want, the logging mechanism that comes out of the box in WMB is not good enough or not used well enough. And in fact, we had some WMB architects and even enterprise architects coming with an idea of having templates for flows. So the first node in the flow will write to a proprietary log that a new flow is starting, and will provide additional information about the event and the message that caused the flow to start. And the last node in this template will be a node that writes to a log that this flow had ended, and will provide additional information about the status and the success level of that specific flow. And then to enforce all the developers to use this template as they are developing their own flows. So basically, they need more visibility, better logging. And I want to give you some examples for the information we believe you need to put in your logs. Now, you can develop your own logging mechanism. You can use existing logs to put this information, or you can bring a monitoring solution that can do that, all this logging automatically for you. The examples, the screenshots that I'm going to show you are actually from a tool called SharePath, that our company developed. And this is just for example, you can write the same information to logs and you'll get the same level of coverage that we believe is needed to properly support WMB. So if this, what you see here is a flow. This is how a flow is developed. And in production, you want to know, or you want to log every time a flow starts. You want to log the event, the parameters that started the flow. You want to log all the nodes that are activated during the log. And the reason you want to go to the node level is because you want to be able to figure out the decision making within the flow in production. And so that, and of course, you want to log the end of the flow and, of course, measure, and if you want, monitor the performance of the flow just for performance monitoring. I also mentioned you want to monitor the MQ activity every time a message is sent in or sent out. You want to see exactly which queue it came from, what was the message content, and so forth. That's very important. And finally, you want to log any errors or exceptions. So if you have a flow, you want to be able to see errors, to see the error code and the exception. If you have that in the log, it will make your life much easier troubleshooting WMB-based solutions. So the next best practice is to keep your message flows lean. Okay, that came for us from a lot of experienced WMB developers and admins. Just keep the flows lean, focus on integration, aspect, and routing functionality. The easy and the simple the flow are, they will be more usable and manageable. So don't forget that flows are integration. A flow is relatively an integration layer, a code that can frequently be changed. And just keep it simple will ease the knowledge transfer to other developers and make it more easy for maintenance. The other side of the SAM-based practice is keep the logic in your application. Whenever you need to make a decision around adding a piece of logic to the code or to your application code or to the message flow, don't be tempted to do that on the message flow. If you have a doubt, just put it in the application. Leave the message flow to do the integration. And again, for the other side, enhance and secure your application API layer so your individual components will be more robust, and just keep everything decoupled. Don't be tempted to add functionality to the flows. Even if you think of that, many of the complicated validation tests or validation code typically is more easy to develop in languages like Java, .NET, and C. So keep the logic in the application. Don't take it out to the flow. Manage interdependencies, just for a thing not to fall between the cracks. Figure out a way to manage the interdependency mapping between the WMB, the message flow, the execution group, the services, the SOA environment, the application, and everything together. Why? Because as you're going to develop more and more flows, you want to know, or you want to have the information. When you make a change, you want to know who's going to be impacted by that, who's going to be affected by changes, which components. And when you have a problem, you want to know who might be affected by this problem as well. Just keep control over the entire solution. Now again, you can do that manually. You can write it, you can do Word documents or Excel, or if you want graph or videos. And you can have bring in different monitoring solutions that will do this work for you. For example, this is a graphical UI showing you the interdependency within an application. You can see the different components of the application. The WMB is in the middle, and you can see which application nodes call the WMB, which services are being accessed by this specific execution group. And of course, you can drill down and see which message flows are being called, and which APIs are used to call each of the source services in a context of transactions. So mapping is very important as you grow with your WMB installation. The 5 best practice is never do changes directly in production. changes should not happen in production. Make an extra effort, have a good UAT environment, and run changes first in UAT. Also have good regression tests, so you can test multiple applications, multiple type of scenarios with every change you do, and run everything through your QA team. Don't be tempted, don't try to do it directly in production. The sixth best practice is manage your transaction accountability. This is actually very important. And it's not directly related to the WMB, but extends to the business transaction, the end-to-end business transaction, and relates to the entire IT stack. Okay, you need to have the ability to audit each business transaction activation from the end user side, to follow it end-to-end, to know exactly which parts were visited, which different applications were visited, how did the transaction end, were there errors, or it was successful, and if possible, log it to a repository. So eventually you'll have kind of a historical repository with all the transactions that you can use for auditing from one side, and from the other side, if you do have problems, you'll be able to search for the specific problematic transaction, see the end-to-end path of those transactions, and figure out where across the entire stack the transaction failed. Again, I mean, it's about the transaction, the critical business transaction that the WMB facilitates. Again, I hear the kind of an example, and there are two ways to do that, basically, to manage transaction accountability. First, you can create a transaction ID at early stages of the transaction, pass this transaction ID across all the application and services across the entire stack, and every time you send a log to your logging mechanism, just add the transaction ID. This information will help you to search for the transaction activities on all of the different applications that it visited or partners that it visited, and will help you build kind of a mechanism for transaction accountability. The other option, of course, is to bring in a transaction management solution, and here's an example for a transaction management solution. We have a transaction starting at the end user, going from multiple components to an application, going to the message broker, going to a SaaS service, to a mainframe, to a database, back to the SaaS service with a response to the application, and then we have a failure in the database. So this transaction failed. Obviously, the WMB is going to be blamed, but in this case, it's not really the WMB who caused the problem, it's the application. And another way to visualize the same transaction is the messages that are passing between the components. It's like a tree structure of the messaging passing through the components. And you can see how the transaction starts as the end user, goes to the different components, visited the WMB, goes to a third party, a SaaS service, then going to the mainframe, to the database, and then going back to the application. And here we can find the SQL that failed at the application level. So this is very advanced transaction accountability that could come very handy in production. The final best practice that I want to share with you is around the monitoring solution. When you try to establish a monitoring strategy for WMB-based solution, take into account the following levels: monitoring of the WMB infrastructure, monitoring of the MQ infrastructure, monitoring the message flows, and at the highest level, monitoring of the end-to-end business transactions that the WMB is facilitating, which is spanned across multiple applications and maybe multiple partners. This is critical. So now I want to talk more about the Correlsense approach. What Correlsense, the company, did for WMB. Just a general introduction for those of you who are not familiar with that. We are both an APM and a business transaction management solution provider. We acknowledge the importance of service buses in today, the next, and future large-scale integration projects. And we did a research around figuring out how to deliver a comprehensive WMB solution to the market. So what I really want to show you is the concept that we have here and some functionalities that I think should be available for anyone going on a WMB-based solution. So let's start with the approach, and everything starts with the way that you collect information. And in order to collect the right information, we use different kind of listeners on the WMB itself. So if this is a WMB, what you see here is a WMB process or an execution group. We have three different hooks through which we can see the activity that is happening within the WMB without directly impacting the WMB. First, we sit on the TCP/IP level on the operating system, so we can see whatever goes in and out from the TCP/IP level. That gives us visibility to all the SOAP requests, all the HTTP traffic that goes in and out of the process, all the SQL that are generated, all the LDAP, all the API calls that are TCP/IP-based are captured. Then we need to put them in context, so we have a listener for the WMB platform itself, where we get information on when flows are being called, flows are being ended, and nodes start and end. And finally, to get more granular information from the MQ layer, we have an MQ listener that provides us information about the MQ and messaging activity. So it's really wraps the WMB from different solutions and gets very granular information of what's going on within the WMB. If you place additional agents on other components, you get a very good visibility to the end-to-end transactions that are delivered to the partner or customers. Now, I want to give you some additional examples of what we believe should be, of functionality that we believe should be available to anybody holding a WMB-based solution. And the first example I want to give you is the real-time aspect of monitoring WMB-based solution. So you can write everything to a log. That is great to have great information. But if you want to be notified immediately when problems are occurring, you need to have real-time monitoring, real-time tracing. Every time a flow is being called, you want to be reported to that. You want to, on the fly, monitor the flow performances, the node performances, to see the interaction between flows or flows are being called until the last flow, and get good visibility both for troubleshooting, so you can see exactly what happened, and from the real-time perspective, be alerted immediately when critical issues are happening. So real-time monitoring, we believe is very important. Deep dive for WMB flows. So our approach is that a flow is not so different from a code, an application code like Java and .NET. And we wanted to provide a deep dive solution for WMB flows. So if you develop in Java and .NET and are familiar with deep dive solution, they will let you know in real time in production which methods are being called and which SQL are being sent to the database and how everything performs. We do the same thing for flows. For each flow being activated, we'll let you know which the flow or the nodes that are being activated, the SQL that are sent from the flows, and the MQs and the messaging that is happening along the way as well. We mentioned the transaction repository, the ability to keep information about all the transactions all the time, and with having that, we believe that you also need to have a Google-like search for transactions. So if you want to find a problematic transaction, if you want to just find a transaction that happened 4 days ago, just go to the search engine, write a text that is part of the transaction. That could be the order ID, the username, part of the transaction. We will bring you back all the transaction without content. It's like a Google-like search for transaction, and then you can open a single transaction instance and see all the information, in this case, searching for a specific item in the MQ message. So Google-like search will definitely be useful. It will save you a lot of time figuring out issuing. Mapping, I already mentioned mapping, so mapping is very important, but what I didn't mention that you should aim at having something that will automatically map all the interdependencies for you. You don't need to configure it from the MQ level, from the TCP/IP level. It will figure out the interdependencies between the components, which applications are calling which execution group, which flows are being called by which application, which services are being called, and manage all of that in real time and historically for you. That is a great capability to have. So this is the presentation that we are delivering for you guys. And I just want to summarize it for you. Okay, just to summarize everything. WMB, IBM's WebSphere Message Broker, is a market leader, and you can see that in Gartner. Like any other service bus or integration platform, it comes with inherent managing and monitoring challenges. And having adopting good practices and having a good monitoring approach will increase your confidence to develop more WMB-based solution and finally to get the maximum capacity that you can from the WMB tool. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, Amir, thank you again for a great presentation. I just wanted to take a quick peek to see if we had any questions at the moment that have come through. Feel free to submit them through the chat window. Just as a reminder, we'll be posting the slides as well as the video with the recording of this on Correlsense.com on our blog. We'll also be sharing the slides on our SlideShare channel, as well as check out our YouTube channel for the video. One more peek. I don't see any video. I don't see any questions. Well, again, on behalf of everyone here at Correlsense, we thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. If you should have any questions about anything in this presentation, feel free to reach out to Amir or to email us at info@correlsense.com, and we're glad to answer any questions. Thank you, and have a great day.